I uncovered some of the greatest forgotten mysteries in the history of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for tuning in. This is not clickbait. This is actually the crux of a 12-month-long project that I have not been soloing. Shout out to Aitson, who's been researching along with me and who actually recruited me, about 12 months ago to work with him in lieu of this research. But we actually uncovered some of the deepest, darkest, hidden secrets about the Yu-Gi-Oh! IP in general, specifically related to the Japanese OCG, so the original card game. We uncovered some absolutely fantastic mysteries and shed light on some of the, most pivotal information in the IP in general, and today we're going to check it out together. Alright, so before we get any further in the video, let me first say that there's going to be a lot more of an informative type video coming out either the day after you're seeing this or a few days later. But first, let me start off by just showing you some of the cards that I have, and I'll give you little bits of information leading up along the way. So I'm going to run this like more of a narrative type video and mostly just show you some of the rare items that I was able to unearth and, have in my possession, though not all of them are going to stay here for a long time. So first, let's flash back to about September of 2022. Aitson, who I met from Squeak's Discord, he posted a picture of this really interesting Hitatsumi Giant card, and it looked a lot like the Silver Fang that you're seeing here. And I inquired, where did you get this? And he kind of told me a little bit about what he discovered so far, but he was still in the very early process of kind of figuring out what the heck he was working with. So we found these non-factory cut cards that obviously came from a sheet, and as a matter of fact, let me pull out the photo. Alright, so the seller who we purchased these NFC test prints from actually sent us photos of an uncut sheet. Well, it's been cut, obviously, but this was the sheet while it was still intact. Obviously, Aitson owns this Hitatsumi Giant, corner cut. I own this Silver Fang with the top bit still intact. And this is just a sheet of Volume 1 common cards. So these were all the commons from the first ever Yu-Gi-Oh! Set in Japan, in Japan, right? So Volume 1 was the first ever Series 1 set. Now, these cards are super interesting, not just because they're cut from a sheet. That's not that special. But if you notice on the back, there's a slightly different logo than what we would normally see on a Series 1 card. For reference, let me show you first just a regular Japanese Yu-Gi-Oh! Card. If you've ever handled one in person, then you're pretty familiar with this being the stamp. In English, we have essentially the same kind of logo, except the kana is covered by the words Yu-Gi-Oh! In English, whereas they're actually the primary focus of the logo in OCG. Okay, so again, if I come back to these photos, you'll kind of see that there looks to be an extra something at the top. If you've got a really keen eye, you might have noticed that right off the rip. But let's go ahead and actually turn this over, and I will show you what exactly is on these cards that makes them so special. Because just being from an uncut sheet is not that big of a deal, but there's something more to this. If you look down here, you can see that this logo actually says Magic and Wizards on the top, which is super weird, right? We thought so too. So essentially, we found these. The seller actually included a regular Volume 1 common of the Silver Fang as well, which is useful it was useful in our early preliminary research in terms of cardstock feel and everything like that. Obviously, you can see some color variation, but when we were able to get high resolution scans and these under magnifying glasses and stuff, or jeweler's loupes, what have you, we were able to see that there's actually visible two-layered ink, which is really, really critical when you're looking at identifying and authenticating trading cards. You look for what's called a rosette pattern, and you want the ink to be overlaid over the rosette pattern, so you have two ink layers. Whereas the primary ink of the monster itself would be part of the rosette pattern, so that it would be kind of like pointillism if you're thinking about it from an art perspective. The dots make up the color, but when we look at the text, this is usually printed on afterwards, a second printing session. So the two-layered ink is super, super important, and that was evident on these, which made me hopeful for their authenticity. Again, there are some subtle differences between these two cards in terms of just their appearance. You can kind of see that the lines are actually blurrier on the officially released OCG card. and they're actually more crisp and fine-tuned on the Magic and Wizards version, so that's kind of interesting, and we'll come back to that point later. But again, I'm not going to try to get this to be too informational of a video, because you have more on that coming out soon. But anyway, so it all started with this Silverfang test print, and we started diving deep. Okay, so let me go ahead and get my area sorted around, and we'll continue with our story. Alright, so the whole concept of this Magic and Wizard stamp was very interesting to us, so we decided to look into it further. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we were deep diving into some old licensing and copyright websites, translating all the information from Japanese to English, what have you. We actually discovered that in December 3rd of 1998, Konami actually applied for a trademark for the Magic and Wizards stamp, again, as you can see here. I'll try to either include an image in the video at this point of the copyright information, maybe over here, or it may have appeared in the thumbnail of the video itself. But yeah, I mean, we actually have the official registration for this logo, the Magic and Wizard stamp. Obviously, if you know anything about OCG history, you know that the Volume 1 set was not released in 1998. It came out in 1999. It does make sense, though, when you're going through the design process and all of the back-end, like, legal mumbo-jumbo of, like, organizing a card game and a product that's going to be mass released. You do all that stuff ahead of time. It's not like the whole production process takes, like, a week to do. So you're looking at a year or two in advance for sure. So this logo is actually applied for and received copyright acceptance in 1998, so we know that it's a real thing. And so that decided to, you know, at that point is when I kind of like pulled the trigger on my Silverfang. Eightzen had already had his copy of Hitatsumi Giant beforehand. He's a bit more of a risk taker, and that'll kind of like bleed through in the story as well, right? So fast forward, we actually discovered also that there were some versions of these Volume 1 Magic and Wizards cards that were not cut from sheets like this one here, or Eitzen's Hitatsumi Giant. There were some that actually appear to have like the rounded square edges and were visibly cut by factory printers. Notably, they were all in really damaged condition, as well as though they had just been shuffled around, like you would see, you know, if you've ever bought a vintage Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh card collection, you know that the commons are typically beat because kids used to store them in empty tins or just unsleeved in binders, in their pockets, etc. So a lot of the cards that we found that were, you know, had these same corner cut edges were just in horrific condition, which goes to show that, well, these probably weren't something that was treated like a treasure, something that was assumed to, you know, retain value over time. And the same can even be said about my Silverfang, the NFC Silverfang. As you can see, like, it's got its fair share of surface blemishes. Down here it's got some damage. I don't know if you can kind of see in the text box or whatever. I don't know why I'm showing off how damaged my test print card is, but it's not perfect is my point, right? So we noticed that all of these like factory produced copies were horribly beat up, which is a good sign because that's attrition, right? And so we dove deeper into the first ever Yu-Gi-Oh pack Volume 1. Again, this is the booster that these would have come from, assuming that they were factory released. Well, I'll do a video on the actual Volume 1 booster pack in the near future because there's some interesting things that I'm theorizing about and have a little bit of concrete evidence, not necessarily suggestive of, you know, where you can find the Magic and Wizards commons in general, but I made some interesting observations, nonetheless, for a future video. So anyways, we got to seeing that, one, this was obviously a sheet of Magic and Wizards commons from Volume 1. There are also commons that appeared to be, you know, cut by the factory, suffered years of attrition by children, that were also floating about. So that got us thinking too, like, well, this is just insane. If you know anything about Volume 1, there's some pretty big cards in that set, including the Dark Magician. And so at this point in time, again, we had never seen any ultra rares with Magic and Wizard stamps, just commons. And again, as evidenced by the sheet the photo of the sheet that I showed earlier, all just commons, right? So far as that's relevant. But it's just fascinating because it got us thinking, like, what on earth would, you know, a Dark Magician sell for, or a Gaia the Fierce Knight, you know, these top tier, Flame Swordsman, all these top tier cards that are in Volume 1, and we'd only seen the tip of the iceberg in the commons. Now, we still have no idea if there were ever, like, factory-produced Dark Magicians, factory-produced Flame Swordsmen that feature the Magic and Wizard stamp, but we do know for sure that the commons were out there, okay? There were Volume 1 Magic and Wizard stamp commons that were cut at Konami, released in Volume 1 packs, and have just withstood the test of time, which is absolutely fascinating. Unfortunately, I do not have a copy of a factory-produced Magic and Wizards card other than the Silver Fang that's non-factory cut. Obviously, same card, but just this one was cut by somebody's hand who had that sheet assembled, whereas like the ones that came from packs are obviously, again, cut per factory standards. So moving along from there, as we fast forward in time a little bit, something else interesting came up. Aitzen actually found this seller. You know, I'm not going to get too deep into like platforms or whatever, but the seller had like a lot of interesting items, and some of which featured the Magic and Wizard stamp. Now, the items that we actually found were a little bit different, and let me go ahead and show you this instead. So the items that we actually identified, we started calling them test prints. In our early discussions, we were calling, you know, the factory released ones prototypes and these test prints. Now, at first glance, you might not actually think much of it, but this card, I don't really want to pull that out of its sleeve, but this card actually has completely different cuts when compared to a factory produced card, right? So I'm not getting the best focus out of my camera, but you can see that the cut is a lot more square. Now, it's way too precise to be like hand cut per se. There's no evidence of these being produced from sheets, but they're clearly a different corner cut. When you were looking at, like, I have a Silver Fang right here, I guess I should have used instead. But again, like, completely different corner cuts. Again, you can see that the shading is a lot more, it's a lot different. So there's just some things here and there. Like, again, we don't have like the super blurry outline like what was actually officially released. And interestingly as well, I will pop this out of the sleeve a touch, but there's also noticeably no glossy sheen like what you would find on a produced Volume 1 card. So these are just weird in general. However, they do have the Magic and Wizard stamp. So that got our attention right away, because that's not something that you just see everywhere. But these things were much different than the commons that we found that appeared to be like cut from Konami, accidentally released in the Volume 1 packs. These do not appear to be an item that was ever intended for circulation or public release. So I was like interested by this. Some of the items were pretty pricey. I was a bit apprehensive. So again, shout out to Aitzen for being a lot more of a risk taker. He purchased some of these and he took high resolution scans, sent them my way, and we discussed these things for months. And I'll be honest, when it comes to these, like these Magic and Wizards test prints with like the square corners, I was super on the fence about whether or not these would actually like be deemed authenticity. And a few of the things that I you know, kind of like deliberated back and forth will feature in the video that I mentioned earlier that I will be releasing. It's actually the video that I sent to CGC in lieu of a conversation of like authenticating these items. More on that soon. So some things that kind of like caught me off guard were when Aitzen sent me the high resolution scans, we could see that these test prints actually had one single layer of ink, which when you're looking at counterfeits, like a lot of cheap counterfeit cards only have one ink layer because they don't have like industrial standard printers. So that was a bit alarming for me and slightly off-putting in the beginning. Furthermore, when we look at the type of cardstock, it not having the glossy sheen was a bit odd as well. Japanese Yu-Gi-Oh cards, particularly the Volume series, are very well known for their glossy sheen, and that's part of the charm of the card in general as well. Glossy cards feel pretty good to hold in your hand. And then there's also like the fact that the corners were visibly different in shape compared to something like a normal Volume 1 print. So all these factors were very odd to me. Aitzen, who had the cards in hand at the time, he thought more confidently that they were legitimate. Me just observing them through a screen, I was a bit apprehensive. As time went on and we like investigated the scans further and kind of like tapped into some other resources, again, this whole time, you know, over the past 12 months, we've been digging through Japanese websites and old print media like Shonen Jumps and stuff like that, looking for hints and details about these things. And what Aitzen and I found was that actually when you zoom in super far on the rosette pattern, again, this will be featured in the video that I'll upload in the near future after this one, but the rosette pattern on these test prints is actually a higher resolution than that of a standard released Volume 1 card. So what that means is the rosette pattern, the pointillist dot pattern that makes up the image and, you know, structure of this card is a lot more blurry and less refined than that of the test print. And that's also like, again, I mentioned that the Silver Fang, even compared to my NFC copy, the Silver Fang that was released in circulation to the public is like visibly blurrier than my than my NFC Magic and Wizard stamp Silver Fang. So this is like a more refined, high-resolution image. Again, just for the sake of conversation, this does have the glossy layer, which indicates that it was like intended for circulation as well. Okay, sorry if I'm getting a little bit bouncy here there, but this is, again, a year's worth of information trying to be condensed into like a 20 to 30 minute video. So anyway, we realized that the DPI of the rosette pattern is actually greater on this. Now, an interesting point that was brought up again by Aitzen was you can't have like a higher resolution image from a copy of a card or a copy of an image. Like, you actually have to have the original file to do that. And so that was interesting. And that got me to actually like pull the trigger on these. Okay, but more on that to come, because the Magic and Wizard stamps were not the first thing that caught my eye from the seller. The first thing that I checked out is this. So here we have an Yugioh limb. So this is the left arm of the Forbidden One, and as I shine it around, you can actually see that the hollow layer is intact. So this is a Series 1 Yugioh limb with the hollow layer intact. And compared to a regular, I actually believe that I have the left arm sitting over here. All right, thank you for that. But we actually have a Series 1 left arm of the Forbidden One, and if you compare the borders, they're like astronomically thicker on this authentic test print version. And something also that you might notice is down here, if we look at the copyright dates, again, this will be more in-depth in the video that I'm going to be releasing that's purely informative, but on the test print we have a much shorter copyright, and at the top we have an elongated version. I actually do have a version of the left arm of the Forbidden One with the shortened copyright information here. Or, no, I'm wrong. That wasn't it. It's a leg that I have with the shortened copyright. Again, this leg is not like a Magic and Wizards card. This is just a standard Yugioh limb, right? So, very interesting in that. And again, more information on the copyright will be included in the article by CGC, as well as the video that I prepared for them in order to start the conversation about authenticating these. So this caught my eye because Aitzen had picked up a couple of these, and in the scans of these like hollow test prints without Magic and Wizard stamps, it had the exact same rosette pattern as their production copy counterparts. And so that was promising. Obviously, again, the two ink layer thing was a big hang up for me with the test prints in general, but the fact that these actually did have the multiple ink layers, they had evidence of the original hollow foil, those were all promising things. Now, the fact that these came from the same seller as the test prints, that kind of helped things out a little bit, right? So that made me a little bit more willing to take a risk. So eventually I did pull the trigger on a test print card. But we essentially reached out to CGC with the video that I'm going to be uploading shortly after this one. I've mentioned it multiple times, so hopefully you get the idea that it's coming if you want more of an informational perspective on these things. But Aitzen and I did a series of tests on the cards just to see kind of what was going on. So first we tested the thickness, which was consistent with the original cards, minus a little bit because they're missing the glossy layer, right? And for some of the test prints that would be ultra rares or super rares, again, like accounting for the difference in thickness and or weight, for the hollow pattern or for the hollow layer as well, like those are things that you had to take in consideration. But essentially the card's thickness and weight was spot on what you would expect. To touch, the cards feel exactly like the Volume 1 counterparts when referencing like the NFC versions, and then when referencing these test print ones, they feel exactly the same except not the glossy feel from that layer. So that was also super fascinating. There are also a few other key details on like placement that we thought were kind of interesting. Like on some of the test prints, the actual like space used by the card was different from like the original to the test print. So for example, like nothing super crazy on like the Silver Fangs themselves, but for some cards, like let's say for example Silver Fang's nose is oriented here on the released item, but on the test print it might be like shifted way up. Again, things that couldn't really be tampered with unless the original image was in hand, because that would expose more of the mountain, right? Hopefully that kind of makes sense what I'm saying, but essentially like that was more evidence in the fact that the people who were selling these or worked with them, what have you, had access to the original images at the time that they were created. Now that paired with the fact that none of these things are in good condition, like all of them are weathered, that was also a promising thing in my opinion, because again, it's not like someone had these like printed freshly and was like, okay, time to go rip off some unassuming collector or whatever. These things were likely kept in a shoebox and forgotten for a very long time. I mean, even my Exodialim, which, like, anyone who knows cards, when they see, like, hollow, they know that's something special. And, like, this thing is just not, it's not a PSA 10 or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not in pristine condition. There's corner whitening up at the top. Like, the whitening itself is, like, off-colored, so that's, you know, indicative of aging. Like, all these things were pretty promising, and that actually got me to take the risk on the test prints themselves. But we did initial tests, like, again, looking at the rosette pattern, the thickness and the weight of the cards, all these types of things. But that's kind of where and then clearly we had, like, evidence of the logo itself being copywritten or licensable material from Konami back in 1998. So we had all these things kind of going for us. So we presented this type of information to CGC and sent off all of our cards for, like, testing on their end. So they actually took, like, chemical samples of the cardstock and the ink to make sure that they were corroborated in that way. And we also provided a bunch of evidence from print media, because what's fascinating is, I noted earlier that the cut of these test prints was much different than the cut of, like, a factory released card, right? So the corners are much sharper, not rounded, whatever. We actually found out that in a bunch of old, like, Shonen Jump magazines and things of that nature, there were cards photographed advertising expansions before their release that had these exact same cut edges, which was very interesting. And we also saw, like, some of the differing copyright dates and just all of these, like, very odd details that kind of fell into place. And so that kind of got us thinking that one of the purposes for these test prints could have been, like, advertisement material. Like, these, not only were they playing around with, like, image placement and text structure and things like that, but they actually were using the test prints to advertise. And that was also a really big factor in our, like, confidence level of, like, buying these things, because we had actually seen them existing physically in Shonen Jump magazine. Again, I believe I show that quite a bit more in, like, the CGC video that I'll be uploading in the near future. As you can see from the left arm of the Forbidden one, though, this was authenticated by CGC after all the tests that they conducted, the information we had gathered, and the small tests that we had done ourselves, again, which were done in a more refined way by CGC's professional staff. But yeah, these were authenticated, which is absolutely fascinating. But this is not the granddaddy of them all. This Exodialim is really, really awesome, but this is not where the buck ends. As a matter of fact, there's something bigger. I have a test print. Again, we can see that the corners are very sharp, so they're not rounded like a production item. And we do have the Magic and Wizard stamp down here. But I was able to source and grade a test print Blue Eyes White Dragon. At some point in the future, I'll be releasing the video of me actually, like, receiving this card in the mail. This thing is absolutely insane. Obviously, if we look at it closely, and I have, like, some higher resolution images and stuff that I've taken while this is in my possession, but we don't have a name stamped out or embossed in any way or printed. The Blue Eyes itself is not hollow, so that's absolutely fascinating as well. I believe that's the only example of the SDK art in non-hollow version. Again, the Magic and Wizard stamp, which corroborates, like, or goes along with all the lore that we have been exploring along this time. Just, this is it. Like, way back in the early days, in the early days of all this research, when all we had were these NFC and unintentionally released Volume 1 commons, we dreamed of something like the Dark Magician or the Blue Eyes existing. We don't have, like, the hollow production copies or whatever, nor do we know that those even are a thing that exists at this time. But these test prints that feature the square corners, the Magic and Wizards logo, slightly lighter color to the back, like, these are here. And we were able to authenticate Blue Eyes, and so there are a few of these in the world. This is not a one-of-one item. Between the two of us, I believe there are 4 of these Blue Eyes cards. Mine is the only one at this time that has an actual grade. So all of the ones that exist outside of this copy have the authentic designator, and mostly it's just because these things are in bad condition. And obviously an 8 is not, like, a terrific grade. You know, there's, like, this, like, weird speckling on the back or whatever. Just that stuff happens, right? Like, speckling and scuffing, small surface scratches. Again, these things weren't, like, being preserved, and they don't appear to have been preserved in any, like, intentional manner. But yeah, I mean, this Blue Eyes is absolutely ridiculous. At the time of me recording this video, this is no longer my card. I've already worked out a deal with a pretty large Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Cross collector for this item. It's absolutely insane, and this is, like, the crux of a year's worth of hard work and dedication, and hearing a lot of people, like, you know, in the early time frame when I just had these NFC test prints, or like the unintentionally released prototypes, like I was showing people who call themselves Yu-Gi-Oh historians, and they were just like pointing them out as like likely fake. Well, after doing zero of the research that Aitzen and I invested into this stuff, and again, over the course of a year, well over 100 hours of research, digging through and translating Japanese websites, licensing materials, old print media. I mean, I can't tell you how many Shonen Jump magazines I have from 1998 laying around my office right now. Like, it's insane. We invested so much time into this, and in the beginning stages, it was quite frustrating for people just to write them off as fake because they didn't know anything about it. I mean, I don't know. I'm not trying to get on a rant or like say anything negative. This is an absolutely like pivotal moment. I don't want it to be like an I told you so thing. This is just crazy, and the implications historically that this stamp has on the IP is just absolutely insane. Like, the fact that this has existed for, you know, 25 plus years, and we are just now made aware of its existence. Like, we're just now, here we are in 2023, and finally something like this has been authenticated by a couple of dudes on Discord. I mean, it's just absolutely wild, in my opinion. It just goes to shows that, you know, like, coming from mostly a Pokemon background, like, hearing all the stories of, like, match prints or the prototype or proto-stoys, you know, these types of things, the Disco test prints that were actually just, like, factory cut from an uncut sheet in the last year or whatever. You know, things like that. You hear about that type of thing, and like as a collector, that piques your interest because those are the types of items that you really want. And also from like the historian aspect, like being the person that uncovered those things, you're remembered by serious collectors in perpetuity. And here we are, Aitzen and I are the ones who unearthed the Magic and Wizards lore of the Yu-Gi-Oh IP, and it's just absolutely mind-boggling, like major imposter syndrome. I don't know. It's just absolutely fascinating. Again, I did mention that the Blue Eyes has already been transacted for. It's no longer mine, which hurts, but it's one of those things where it's like, you know, you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? I do, you know, the hollow Exodia limb is still mine at this time, though I'm not sure I'm going to keep it forever. If you're interested, you can inquire. But at this time, I am the world's most rare Silver Fang collector, which is absolutely fascinating. Because this is the thing that started it all for me, I am going to keep the test print as well. And this is just absolutely phenomenal. It's insane what a little bit of persistence and, you know, consistent work over time will get you, you know, will position you for. But just absolutely insane stuff. I thought this was just way too cool not to share. I don't really know what else to say, so let's go ahead and hit an outro. I'll be honest, after quite a few years of being back in the collectibles space and having held and sold and collected tens of thousands of cards in that time, not many things leave me speechless, but the product of all this work absolutely does. These Magic and Wizards test prints are the coolest thing, hands down, that I have ever done or taken part of or held in any trading card game, period, in my entire life. These things are absolutely mind-bogglingly cool. Again, there will be a more information-focused video coming out in the very near future, whether it be a day or two after this one, so keep an eye out for that. And the video that you will be seeing at that time is actually the research that was the research that Aitzen and I presented to CGC in order to start the conversation of them testing the cards for authentication. So when we submitted the video to CGC, we were not sure what they were going to find or, you know, be dismissive of or anything. We presented them with the information we had gathered, and then they conducted their own testing on the cards physically and chemically in that manner, and deemed them authentic, which was extremely validating. Obviously, you know, we didn't know for sure. You can never be 100% certain about anything, but we were 99% sure that these things were legitimate. And, you know, the chemical and physical, you know, inspection of these cards by CGC, who's undoubtedly the most reputable company when it comes to these types of oddities, having authenticated the proto-stoys, the disco test prints, etc., the double print Pokemon cards, they were the obvious choice. And it's just, again, absolutely insane. So here's one last look at the test print Blue Eyes. This will be, at the time of you seeing this video, this will have been already sent out in the mail to its future forever home. So with that being said, I appreciate all of you for watching. Stay on the lookout for the video coming tomorrow for a little bit more information of our of our accumulated information prior to the authentication process. As always, thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one.